on this computer. All right. So this conversation is now being recorded. So those were the two things. No, we did not win anything in the final round of NHC, but we got there. That was a big step, and that was on the club's stated goals for 2019. Maybe we'll put 2020 win an award there, but you really can't count on that. It's up to judges. Then the other thing was that Oregon State Fair, I had a conversation with Chad Hummert, and he is in fact going to isolate a gluten-free category for us, and we will be able to compete on a level playing field against only dedicated gluten-free beers. So I would encourage everybody to ship some beer to the Oregon State Fair. I'll be posting, once he's got the category updated, he's looking for some help on the category definition, and I don't know where to go for that. I was thinking of maybe asking James, because I told him I thought it would be unfair if I wrote the definition and then entered the category. It seems like if you write your own rules for a category, you might be, kind of tilting the game in your favor. So
how many points do you get if you have a last name that happens to be the same as yours, like those types of rules?
Yeah, exactly. So we gotta figure out how to get him a category definition that sort of riffs off of alternative grains, alternative fermentables, but just maybe omits barley, wheat, and rye. Might be a way to start that. But those entry deadlines are in July. The July meeting is going to be the much awaited how to brew for competitions and how to send beer across the country meeting that a lot of people have been asking for. So we'll do that in the coming month. And there's going to be a special guest delivering that one. I won't disclose too much, but I think there's going to be some good news coming out of that one. That's an online only meeting. This is our summer meetup, and then we're going to be online until fall. Trying to think if there was anything else on club related stuff. Next month's meeting, nobody want anything? Can anybody think of other club related stuff that's pressing?
If people need shipping boxes, I have dedicated boxes for shipping 22s.
That's great.
Happy to part with my cost.
Could they be fitted to 12s? Because that's what competitions usually require, or 312s.
Just kind of wrap. If they put something around each beer and stuck it in basically the
all right.
for 22, that would work.
So Dan's got boxes if you need them. We can work out something with him. Yeah. I thought there was something else club related, but maybe it'll come back to me.
You made a case to ship 12 22s plus the package on it. It's $5.
Great. Awesome. All right, so I think that's all that I had for club stuff. Do we want to do introductions real quick? I'm Joe. This is my lovely wife, Shelly. This is Nick from Nectar Creek. Thank you for coming. He's our special guest.
Hey, everybody.
Kurt Schultz from PDX Brewers. Also, Brandon from PDX Brewers. Dana from Zero Tolerance. And Dan from Moonshrimp. And then who do we have there? Who do you have with you today, Kale?
Hey, this is Kale, and I have my friend Chris here.
Hi, everybody.
Who is also just getting into gluten-free brewing as well.
Cool. Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming. And I see the mighty Ben Fowler, winner of JP Beerley's brewing contest.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm currently driving back from the in-laws. So my wife is driving. I'm sitting in the back seat with my son, and I'll probably be on mute so she can listen to some music for most of this. But got the headphones. I'm ready to go.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for tuning in and making an effort, despite travel. So
absolutely, man. Yeah, I'm excited for this one.
So the topic for this meeting is Session Meads. I think they're an excellent alternative beverage to kind of work in for gluten-free folks. I got the idea because I had tried a few from Nectar Creek. I really loved Waggle. Drank too many of them last summer and got the idea to make some. And then I drank too many of those. But I wanted to talk about it because the biggest problem that we have in the club that I see show up repeatedly is where do you guys get your grains? Where do you get your grains for gluten-free brewing? And it's tight. I mean, there's really only 2-3 options for getting gluten-free grains unless you're making them yourself. And home malting, which is a whole other level of expertise, and it's a big barrier to entry. Cider, it's seasonal. Juice can be pretty expensive if you're getting the good stuff. Also, it's always just going to be cider. Like, it's going to taste pretty cidery all the time. It's distinct. And then I thought, like, well, this would be a good thing to work in because anybody can really get honey. And you can do it, scale it to pretty large batches and very small. It doesn't matter. I've noticed with honey, the bigger volumes, it doesn't impact the price that much. Compared to, like, you can spend $20 for a little thing of honey, you know, on raw unfiltered honey, or $20 for a pretty large one. So, and 40. But when you're talking about 6 pounds of honey and a $3 packet of yeast, you've got like a $25 beverage that you're getting 5 gallons of drinkability from. So I thought it would be a good thing to talk about in the club. And we happen to have an expert in the field who's doing it professionally, and I invited Nick to come up and talk about this. I've been trying to make this happen for a little while, and I'm glad you're here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm just going to introduce Nectar Creek really quick, if that's all right. Nectar Creek's been open since 2012, and it's a company my brother and I started, and we got into it out of kind of a natural marriage of our interest in agriculture and fermentation. And so my brother worked for a big commercial bee farm that manages about 5,000 beehives for about 10 years. And so we really were asking ourselves, how do you join the craft beverage world, but not just make more beer, because there's too much of that as it is, and how do we tie it a little bit more into our roots of agriculture? And it's kind of this like no-brainer of, it's like, oh wait, we got access to all this honey. And then we got really hooked on the idea of Session Mead because I think that meads that are over 10% alcohol, one, the price point that it's going to be on the shelf is going to change a bit, and then the time that it takes for them to make is a lot more significant. So if you're opening up a business as young people and your goal is to make a product and start selling it, and you make something and you can't sell it for a year later, you know, that's kind of like limits your entry. And so part of it was really simply just like, how do we even feasibly start a business that we can start selling something? That was part of where Session Mead came from. And then the other big thing is just how do we change the mindset from what people know and perceive about mead, making it more of like an everyday, approachable style of beverage rather than this special occasion, more aperitif style of drink. But yeah, so we've been making it in the Corvallis area for since 2012, and one of the big things for us is we're a Session Mead company, and we just use 100% raw honey straight from bee farms that we have direct relationships with. So no packing houses, no distribution, kind of honey distributors. It's just straight from bee farmers into our facility. And when you're making a product that sometimes is literally only honey and water, the quality of the honey is pretty dang key to how good that product is going to be.
And you guys are in Philomath, is that right?
Yep. Yeah, so Philomath is just right between essentially Corvallis and Newport. If you have never been to our facility, you should come down. It's in a pretty amazing location.
It looks cool. I've driven by and I was like, oh, we should stop. We have to continue to the coast, and I don't know if I should throw back a few weeks.
Yeah, here in Portland you can find it. You know, we actually send product to 10 states, but most of it is in Oregon, between essentially most of the volume is Portland, Corvallis, Eugene area. So we do cans, we do 500 milliliter bottles, and then you can get kegs around on tap at different places too. Yeah. All right, next thing I always like to touch base about is just make sure that we're all working on the same definition of mead. And so the way I like to talk about it is mead is really simply defined by fermentable sugar, right? And as all alcohols are. And so beer, meaning fermentable sugar, is coming from grain. Wine, meaning fermentable sugar that comes from fruit. And mead is just any alcohol made by fermentable sugar from honey. And so the diversity that is out there for mead, I think, is really pretty limitless. And when you think about, so there's something like 400,000 known flowering plant species in the world, right? And depending on what the bees are collecting nectar from, will determine what color the honey is, what the flavor of the honey is, and everything like that. So, not all 400,000 known flowering plant species produce nectar that bees can turn into honey, but the opportunity for just single varietal honey meads is really pretty limitless, like way more than there are kinds of hops, way more than there is kind of grain, and way more than there is varieties of wine, right? And then the same concepts of like vintages play in and terroir plays in. So like clover honey from the Willamette Valley is not going to be the same as clover honey from like the Dakotas or another big honey producing region. So, just looking at the different varieties of honey, the opportunity for the mead category is pretty limitless. And then within that, you can make an 18% sweet mead that's more of an aperitif style drink. You could make something that's 13% really carbonated, and you would think it's a champagne. You could make something that tastes pretty much like a Pinot Gris, like more like a still white wine, or you can make something that's a session mead, which is going to be carbonated. Definition mead typically run by is below 10%. I've seen ones that's also below 7%, and then just varying sugars levels. But then you can use all kinds of yeast and all different yeasts, different sweetness levels, all different adjuncts. And one of the amazing things about honey, which is very different than wine or cider, is that it's really neutral. There's not a lot of acidity to it. And so, whereas you're just saying like cider is going to end up pretty cidery, because mead and honey are so neutral, you can play with so many different adjuncts and so many different flavors, and they take well with just about everything. Where I don't think that works as well with cider or some of these other bases. And now, in beer, we're seeing all kinds of fruit and different things added, but the things that actually work and taste well are, a limited section, where with mead being a very simple and neutral, can be a very neutral base depending on your kind of honey, the opportunity is pretty limitless of different things that work. And so I kind of got a different spectrum that we can taste through here. So that's, just want to make sure that we're all kind of working on the same, like, I get people, it's like, oh, it's honey beer or it's honey wine, and we really actively try not to get people to use those terms, ever. And I think that that's part of, mead, despite being the oldest alcoholic drink in the world, like one of the oldest written recipes that's ever been found, commercially, people still have a very limited knowledge.
And I think it's because of that high ABV, low drinkability, where you're drinking it like brandy. Where I won't get too sidetracked, but to make a quick note about the commercial side of things in relationship to mead is when when craft beer started to become more and more popular in the United States, with places like Anchorstein and Sierra Nevada, every person and most people in the country knew what beer was already. Beer had been made as light and as easy drinking as possible for kind of all of time, to the point where, millions and millions of barrels of beer were being sold. And then people came and said, hey, look, I can use better ingredients and have a bigger depth of flavors. But there was already demand for beer, and people already knew what it was, right? So imagine what it would have taken for the craft beer market to have grown if, like, the only thing that had ever been made was barley wine, right? The only thing that had ever been put out was, like, thick, like, something that you typically would drink like 4 to 6 ounces of, not like 20 cans of. Down the side of the glass.
So you know, the beer market was like people already knew what it was. It was already defined. When Sierra Nevada went to bars when they were just getting going, they said, "Hey, look, we make beer." And they said, "Oh yeah, we know what beer is." For us, we say, "Hey, we make mead," and they go, "What? You're a butcher?" And it's like, "No, we make alcohol from honey." And then they go, "So it's a honey beer?" It's like, no, it's mead, like we just said. And so the explanation and the barrier is a lot stronger. And then the people that do know what mead is, we're oftentimes met with the like, "Oh, my uncle made that in his basement once. It's gross. I'm never going to try it again." And it's like, well, have you ever had it? Like, what do you normally drink? It's like, "Oh, I drink beer." You know, you ever had a beer you didn't like? It's like, yeah, of course. It's like, "You still drink beer?" It's like, yeah, every day. It's like, okay, so like, why are you not going to be open to this other style of drink? So, you know, that's it's a definition that I think that there's not much familiarity with, and that there's kind of entries when you're talking with different people about it. But the reality is mead is really simply like bees collect nectar from flowers, turn it into this magical golden liquid we know is honey, and then, you know, session meads we're turning into these light and refreshing beverages. Like, if that's all you know about mead, that's a pretty dang like romantic concept of a beverage that can be out there. Like, we're distilling the taste of flowers and making it something that's like light and easy to drink. You know, if that was what everyone's perception was, rather than it being this like Beowulf or Viking type of thing.
It's just like a big marketing challenge because I feel like if this is marketed properly, like all of my friends would drink this.
Yeah, so that's.
They would all drink this because it's delicious and refreshing and light.
So.
I'll get the word out there.
Before, I guess, you know, before I ramble on that too long, I'll switch focuses to talking about is making mead. And so, you know, really simply, your ingredients are water and honey to start out with, right? Like that's the foundation of it. The quality of honey is really key. It's something like 80% of the honey that's commercially on the market is not pure honey, right? That you can go to like Taco Bell and you can get a little honey packet and it never crystallizes, which is kind of scary because real honey crystallizes, which pretty much means that it's a combination of like corn syrup and artificial flavor, or like artificial coloring and other stuff like that. And so, you know, if you're starting with something like that, you're going to get a product that finishes like that. And so being particular about where you're getting your honey is important. But like you're saying, people have access to honey, you know, regardless of where you're at in the country, you can get raw honey nearby. There's a farmer's market, there's a farm, there's a Whole Foods type of place where you can get either bulk raw honey or gallon jugs of honey or something like that. So, you know, really focusing on that and then taste different honeys, you know, like I was saying, depending on what the bees are pollinating will determine the flavor of it. And so, you know, here in the kind of Willamette Valley general area, we're a big agricultural area, so we have a lot of different honey. And for us, like wildflower honey, which is something we use quite a bit of, just means that bees are collecting a myriad of different nectar sources. A lot of it is like maple flowers. They're one of the very first things that bloom. So big leaf maples actually produce quite a lot of honey, and that's a little bit of a darker, richer honey. Blackberry is a huge one. So right about, you know, blackberries kind of just finishes typically the first couple weeks of June is the main blackberry bloom. And for bees to make honey, they want it to be about 70 degrees and sunny. They navigate by the sun, so if it's overcast, they're not as active, but that's kind of like prime. So they'll, you know, this last month has actually been pretty great for honey making weather. So sometimes in Oregon, it rains the first couple weeks of June. And so year to year, you can look at the weather pattern and kind of know what the honey. So blackberry honey is pretty neutral, very light in color. And so this year we anticipate a pretty light, like the wildflower honey will be a little bit lighter in color and have a lot of dominant characteristics from blackberry, where if it rains the first couple weeks of June, you're likely to have a little bit of a darker, a little bit of a richer honey. And so things like sorrel and poison oak and maple and all these other random things are going to be more dominant nectar sources. But we also have big commercial agriculture that we can get honey from. So like you can get white clover honey, right? And white clover honey we can pretty much get endless amounts of, and it's consistent. You know what it's going to taste like. Or a little bit, you know, but to be able to produce a consistent product where there's so much innate variability is pretty key. And I also think that, kind of going back to the commercial side of things, that I think that people that are being introduced to mead are oftentimes looking at it with a more critical eye, where the beer industry is so established. If someone drinks a beer they don't like, they know that there's other beer out there that they like. If someone drinks a mead that they don't like, that may be the only mead that they ever tried because they said, well, oh, I just don't like mead. And
I have
so,
the same problem. Oh, I tried a gluten-free beer.
yeah, I don't want it. It's like, well, no, that's not all
It
beer.
was Redbridge 9 years ago. I was one of those people.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You're
So-
here, you've learned.
We have a hard time overcoming that as well.
Yeah.
And the reason that you guys are such a great option for us is
Yeah.
we're actually actively seeking other things to drink.
Yeah.
Because we're
Having
cut off
bigger
from
diversity.
beer. Like we're all cut off from beer with the exception of what we're making, or the 11,
You
or
might get
so
some cider,
North American
Yeah.
beers are producing, and those most of them aren't distributed widely. So
Easy fun.
we're lucky here in Oregon because we got like 5 guys we can pull beers from pretty consistently, and that's great. Thanks to 2 of the guys in the room, and then the place where we're sitting.
Oh yeah.
So it's awesome that you're making a product that we can all consume without any fear, because there's always that sort of dodgy thing. Can I ask a couple quick questions?
Please, yeah.
So I stepped out for a moment. Did you talk about how the things that the bees are pollinating, how greatly they can be received in the honey? Because okay, we had these guys belong to another club called PX Brewers, and we tasted some orange blossom honey that was so orangey, and we tasted meadow foam, which tasted like marshmallows, which is great. And we tasted, this was the real treat, was there was a lime blossom honey that straight up tasted like limes. There was no juice added. It was just incredibly citrusy, and I just find that so fascinating. How much of that from the pollen and the nectar pulls in, and it's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I think the concept a little bit is what we know about the wine industry, right? Is that it's like wine is simply defined by the grape that it comes from, where you could make mead that's simply defined by the honey exclusively, And so the difference of a maple honey to a blackberry honey to a avocado blossom honey or a buckwheat honey.
Oh yeah,
or
that's a little.
I'm not really, buckwheat honey doesn't taste very good. I wouldn't recommend making mead out of it. It's very musty
I'd
and
recommend
earthy,
keeping it down in
but
gluten-free
it's definitely
it's
definitely an example of it, like a very clear flavor profile. Or meadow foam. Meadow foam honey is like really sought after and typically sold for a lot more. But what is it? It's like vanillin is the compound that makes you perceive vanilla, and it's in meadow foam honey at like tens of thousands of times the parts per million that it needs to be for you to perceive it. And so making a mead with pure meadow foam honey is like so overwhelming. Like, it's like if you drink vanilla extract, it's like, that's crazy, And so it's so intense that you could use, dominantly wildflower, or dominantly, 90% of your honey could be wildflower or white clover. And then you could just do like 5 to 10% meadow foam honey, and you would think it's just a meadow foam mead. And then it would be a little bit more manageable to drink and not just be like kicking your butt that marshmallow flavor.
I do have a big jug of orange blossom honey, and I was going to do a session mead off of it. Should I cut that with wildflower?
I'm not as familiar with that, because at this point all of our honey is just from the Willamette Valley, so we don't have a lot of citrus here in Oregon.
Right.
Not yet, maybe in 20 years. That's what you're
Hey, oh.
I had a really good meeting with fireweed.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's good stuff.
Isn't that good? Yeah, fireweed meat.
Guess I started bleeding. I need a little rack here.
Oh.
Napkin. Go to the bathroom real quick.
Sorry,
Sorry.
yeah, no worries.
Be right back. Intermission.
Cool. So, well, oh, okay. We'll do this. We'll do. The one that I used was the one that's sitting on the table here that Dana is bringing to the group, which is great. Yeah. Honey. She calls me honey. So this is the honey that Dana brought. It's Oregon growers wildflower honey, and the mead that I brought is just that honey water. And I used wine yeast. I had some wine yeast around. It was I want to say D47. Is that the Narbonne yeast? Narbonne strain, I think, is what I had around from some wine making experiments that didn't turn out so great, but much better in the mead.
So, moving on to a little bit more nuts and bolts about making mead. Honey is, depending on there's some variance depending on the kind of honey and depending on the plants that nectar is being collected from. But for the most part, honey is about 80 to 85% solids. And that solid pretty much is being sugar, right? All simple sugar. And so with that, you can kind of give yourself a simple ratio that about 1 pound of honey is about equivalent to 1% alcohol in 5 gallons.
Right.
A gallon of honey is about 12 pounds, right? So if you did 1 gallon of honey, 4 gallons of water, you would have starting gravity to give yourself something that's going to be about 12% alcohol. There's a lot of online recipes for how to make mead that say 50-50. I really don't recommend that because that means 2.5 gallons of honey. So that's what, like 30 pounds. That's an overwhelming amount of sugar for any yeast to really be happy. And so, something you'll hear sometimes from people that have made mead is like, oh, I made it once and like it tasted weird and I just let it sit for like 4 years and then I think it's good. It's like, well, pretty much means like whatever yeast you put in probably died pretty quickly and then some other bacteria was working for some amount of time, and now that's what you're drinking. So, really thinking about kind of like the osmotic pressure and how much sugar you have in the beginning is going to be really key. And so, being really intentional with that is really key. So, for us, you're honestly like 90% of your volume is water when you're making session meads, and that's also now a sugar level that's manageable for most yeast strains that you're going to be using. So 1 pound of honey essentially is equivalent to 1% potential alcohol in 5-gallon carboy.
And do you find that you still need to nutrient dose it at a pretty high level?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Compared
to something like beer.
Yeah. So, all right. So mixing honey, right? So we're starting out. You got your good honey. You've got the ratio of honey to water you want. We do all cold brewing, and so we never heat our honey up warmer than it would be naturally in a beehive. Bees keep their honey at about 95 degrees year round. At that point, it's liquid enough that it's easy to go into solution and can be stirred in. And so part of the point is that a lot of the esters that are producing these delicate floral flavors and keeping the characteristic of the honey, they'll dissipate starting at about 100 degrees. So if you're doing anything like that, you're essentially getting rid of a lot of those delicate flavors. And then the other piece is the sugar starts to caramelize, also not too much over 100 degrees. And so, both of those are good reasons. But so, if you have raw honey, that means you're starting with a mixture of water and honey that's got all kinds of wild yeast and wild bacteria and things like that that are present. And so, and then by the time you dilute it, you're now giving them all the opportunity to grow. And so, really healthy yeast pitch and really healthy nutrients are really key. One of the descriptions I always say is that making mead is easy. You mix honey and water and add yeast. You know, it's a relatively simple process compared to like brewing a batch of beer. But the fermentation part but making good mead is difficult because, you know, mead is very light. There's not acidity. There's not bitterness that could mask, you know, weird issues that you could potentially have. Yeah, exactly. Like if something's weird, you can't just like dry hop it and make whatever happen disappear a little bit. So, so if you don't have your fermentation right, it's something that is going to be clear. It's something that you're going to be able to taste. And so, so we really simply just heat the honey up. We essentially have like a honey sauna that we can control the temperature of, and so it's liquid and something you can use. You can put honey like in a container, just like in warm water. Yeah. Is a really easy way to get it to a temperature that's like manageable and it's a little bit more liquid to be able to work with. Is a good way to get it to a place that you can. And so for us, like we get it to a point where we can just pump it, right? We can just like put a hose in a 55-gallon drum of honey and pump it when it's about 80 degrees, which is nice. But you know, on a smaller level, you could use just like a brew pot or a brew kettle and essentially just, you know, trying to start with as neutral water as you can, honey, and you can just stir it, and then you can just essentially pour that into, you know, your sanitized carboy pretty simply once it's all completely in solution. So then, you know, choosing yeast strains. The yeast strain we use, we actually kind of found off of my brother's senior thesis in school was he made 12 different varieties of mead and he used different yeast strains. And so he taught like a sensory analysis class and had both like people doing sensory analysis on all the products. And then he also did using a spectrophometer, like a real like chemical analysis of all of them to kind of determine what works well. And I think that some of the keys that we have found are, so we essentially use a white wine strain. And a big part of that is that these yeast strains have been used alongside nutrients for a long time. And so when you're doing nutrient additions, these yeast strains know how to take in these nutrient additions compared to like if you're using like a beer yeast that typically just has what's in the wort and is used to the nutrient that's present in the wort. It's a different kind of crossover. You can definitely use beer strains to make successful meads, but we really prefer a lot of the floral notes and the fruity notes and the ester production that comes out of essentially like a killer white wine strain. And then when you're using that, you also have a strain that's naturally producing some level of SO2, right, which is helping with any live other yeasts and bacteria and things that could potential, you know, pose threats. The other thing that we studied a lot was, so if you look at a fermentation curve, right, the first 48 hours are kind of like it goes to its peak and then it slows down. After that, when carbonic acid is at its peak of production, and you're making a mead that's over 10% alcohol because of the pH will get down close to 2, below 2, which not a lot of things live in that sort of environment. And so if you're making anything over 10% alcohol with a mead, you have to, you know, think about how low the pH level is going to get and how that's going to be stressing your yeast out, which then oftentimes means the flavors you don't want. So for higher ABV meads, we kind of like to do like step additions with sugar. And so as you know, it's like maybe like sugar reduction at a third. You can do if you want to make something above 10%, that's what we would recommend. Or just, you know, really being conscious of your pH and kind of adjustments to make sure that it's staying healthy throughout. And so the other key thing, honey doesn't really have like yan, you know, on, you know, any amount of level, where in like wort, you don't really have to think twice about, you know, if you're making a beer, you don't really have to think twice about it for the most part. And so nutrient additions are absolutely key. And we've done a lot with playing with different timing of nutrient additions, and most of what you find, you know, you can't really find anything specific to meat. You know, you can't, there's not a lot you can go and read about, like, depending on what kind of nutrient you're adding and when, what does it do to meat? It's really mostly studies with wine and all these yeasts. And, you know, they're applicable enough that they apply. Side note, UC Davis has a big honey and pollination center, and a part of their fermentation program, they've been pairing up, and they've actually been doing some of the first kind of like big published studies about mead with some of the, so you can actually read a little bit, you can find their articles publicly about nutrients and fermentation of mead. And they talk a lot specifically about micronutrients like zinc and some of these other things and their impact. So things that like a general yeast nutrient would include. So, you know, I don't have anything specific that I would recommend for nutrient additions aside from like definitely do it. You can find things that say, you know, like at a third sugar depletion, do, you know, this level of nutrient addition, and then another third, so at 2/3 sugar depletion, do another one. There's ones that kind of speak to just, you know, essentially 24 hours after pitch, just do one giant one and that'll ride through. And it all kind of varies on how much alcohol you have, what yeast you're using, and everything like that. I think that you can be successful with any of them, just as long as you definitely have to add some level of nutrients if you're going to have a successful fermentation. It'll be successful, but you'll have a much better flavor profile with making sure that nutrients are added. And that's kind of where the making mead is easy, but making good mead is difficult. Is you really have to monitor the fermentation on a more detailed level than you maybe do with thinking about beer sometimes, because it's like beer, it's like once you get it in the carboy and you add yeast, you can kind of like, all right, as long as it stays the right temperature, like I don't have to think too much. So we got raw honey mixed together with water in a ratio you want for your alcohol content mixed together. You've got really healthy yeast, and so making sure you're kind of going through not just like pitching a dry package of yeast, like spend the time to make sure that what you're adding is a healthy pitch. You know, starting that, kind of kickstarting it with some of that mixture of honey and water, doing things like making sure that when you're adding it to the batch, it's the same temperature as the liquid that you're adding it to, and giving it time to kind of essentially just rehydrating your yeast and pitching a healthy yeast is pretty key. And so once you've done that, and you're thinking about nutrients, temperature, right? It's another thing that we can talk about. So when we were very first going, we were kind of going back and forth about different temperatures, because some of the yeasts that we were using, you know, had such a huge spectrum of temperature that they weren't successfully under. And we spent a while talking with some different folks and kind of doing our own trials. And so we ferment in the low 50s, so colder, almost more lager type of style. And you can ferment all the way up to, you know, 68 or quite a bit higher. And what we found is that ester production at higher temperature is greater, but they're not as stable, so they won't stick around as long, where at colder temperatures you're creating something that's going to be more stable. And then it's also a balance of time, though. You know, it's like you could ferment a 5% batch of mead in 48 hours if you wanted to, or you could do it in 3 weeks at 50 degrees. But so, you know, there's this perception that mead takes forever to make, which is not accurate. If you're making something that's 5%, like all of our meads from brew day till in the bottle are like 20 days. Which compared to like, you know, New Belgium makes IPA in 48 hours, it seems like a long time compared to that type of thing. But, you know, compared to a lager or cider or anything else, it's kind of right on that place. But so making mead, you know, you shouldn't have this barrier of like, oh, it's going to take forever, or I'm not going to be able to drink this for over a year. Unless you want to make something that's a little bit higher in ABV, where those types of things I definitely would recommend sitting on a little bit longer and giving more time. Which, you know, is equivalent to if you make wine at higher ABV, you're going to do the same thing. If you make a much higher ABV beer, it's also going to be a longer process than, you know, some others, you know, it's a little longer. So that's a little bit about temperature. I talked about yeast a little bit, using yeast strains that are used to nutrient additions, and a lot of the wine yeast strains produce a lot of these floral and fruity flavors. I think it really just depends what you're looking for. Honey is a beautiful thing and it speaks for itself, and so trying to not kind of overwhelm with the flavor that can be produced from your yeast strain. But, you know, it's also kind of fun. Like we've done different styles with like making different sours, or doing like all Brett, you know, like using Brett or doing lacto. The Brett is really difficult to work with mead, and the reason is Brett, when it has access to simple sugar, produces it's not diacetyl, but it perceives itself really closely to drawing a blank on it. It's like really like peanut skin, off flavor. Yeah. Huh?
Oh, I know the
Is it the THP? Is it the Cheerios?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So in mead, it's really like we've had a really difficult time figuring out how to use Brett and not have that be an issue for us. And part of the reason is like where that comes from is pretty much like what the environment of the mixture of honey and butter is.
You're trying to have a fainter pitch.
Yeah, so we've done like, or do like full fermentation and add it, you know, and we've played with different stuff, and it's we've had difficulty with it, but we've done pure lacto fermentations with like lacto brevis, so the lactic acid fermentation and the alcoholic fermentation, and it tastes amazing. One of my favorite meads we ever made was an 8% raspberry mead, so mix the honey and water, and then pitch lacto brevis, and it tasted like a less sour, less sweet framboise. It was like lighter, easier drinking. It was one of my favorite things that we've ever made. So if you want to play with sours and meads, it's an opportunity. Brett's going to give you a lot more challenges, and I think that doing lacto fermentations is going to be easier to work with, and I think the flavor of it works better with what the body of mead provides.
And see the Berliner meats, guys.
Yeah. Yeah, and then, you know, the other, so, you know, that gets us through most of the way through fermentation. If you want to do, and by the way, we can start passing these around right now.
Break it out for reserve.
How you buy them? Buy them in packs of 4?
Yeah, so we have 4 packs, and then we also have bottles of pigs.
Like
One for each.
$11.99. Yeah, typically. Yeah, really.
Yeah.
We have not networked for that.
I'm curious because that's
Do you guys want to? We'll send them as looks like 4 different kinds here. To break up and share.
Yeah.
you were to try it, something like that.
Yeah.
Waggle's my favorite. Yeah. So,
Do you guys all know about nutrients?
we do, because we all brew
Then I don't
pretty
need-
heavily, but
You don't need to.
yeah, so like.
If you go to a brew shop, like,
Yeah.
just,
We've got
there's some general, just like, I'm gonna call them like all-purpose nutrient additions, like for Made K, or something like that is kind of like your standard nutrient blend that you can get. And honestly, something like that works awesome. Like, you can geek out and study about like all of the details that it can get into, and if you like to do that, then do it. But if you're not as familiar, you can also just like go to the brew shop and get some for Made K and make sure that you have that, and you'll be able to make mead that tastes great.
Is there a big GF on here or not? I'm just like, I feel like so many people would buy this.
Yeah. Yeah, you gotta.
It's attractive packaging.
The big GF is an expensive certification.
It is, yeah.
So,
Yeah, I don't have it.
So the last thing that's really difficult with mead is similar to cider. All of the sugar is fermentable. So if you make a mead dry, it literally has 0 sugar left in it.
Yeah.
And so meads that have 0 sugar left in it lose, and because mead doesn't have, like honey on its own, doesn't have a lot of acidity or bitterness or anything like that, it's very thin when it drinks, right? It doesn't have a lot of body. And so some level of residual sugar, I think is really nice. And it doesn't need to be a lot. You know, pretty much all of our meads sit between like 1.5 to 2 bricks of residual sugar. And
10-10 for those standard gravity guys, or the gravity guys, is that about 10-10?
yeah, I think so.
I had to crash mine out to get it to stop, because it stalled around 10:20, and then I added some yeast energizer, gave it a swirly, put it back in there, and then it kicked back up again. And when it kicked up again, I mean, it really started off gassing a lot, and I was like, okay, now it's moving. And I checked it about a week later, and it was closing in on like 10:10, and I said, that's it, you're done. I don't like to crash things, because I'm worried about there being uncleaned up byproducts thrown out there and stuff.
So what
This is
we'll
a brewery. They spray the floors down every.
so what we'll do getting the package to be stable,
The guys,
right, is something you have to think about. You have re-fermenting bottles or re-fermenting product, because even if you crash it, you know, we're working with yeast that are used to working at cold temperatures, and so, you know, no matter how good your cooler is, like, it's still slowly going to be cranking away. So if you're making it at home and putting it in kegs or something like that, just like drink it. You know, it's if you're making a 5% mead and you have a kegerator, or you have, you know, some opportunity like that, like put it on tap right away and drink it. You know, it's gonna be the best it's gonna be right at that time. And what we've kind of found is that, so our meads, we pasteurize them just with heat, just to make sure that we don't have exploding bottles on shelves and kind of have to have a commercial product. And we use a cross-flow filter. So we use a clay, like a ceramic filter, to filter all of our mead to have that consistency, and shelf stability is pretty clear. So at home, like I was just saying, you know, crash it, put it in your cooler, and drink it. It may ferment like continually a little bit on some level, and so it'll become a little drier and maybe a little bit more carbonated, but it won't necessarily ruin the flavor. And you know, you should have luck that way. But so that's kind of one of the most difficult things that on a home level of making mead and anything with residual sugar, you kind of have to work with, is how to do that, and or you know, you can do things like add SO2 or other chemicals to stop it, but I think that for us, you know, using heat doesn't really alter the flavor in any way, where for us to be certain about it and add some kind of chemical, there's not very many of them that you can add, that by the time you add enough of them, that we can rest easy to think that it's not going to be re-fermenting, that you're not going to taste. And
sulfur allergies are a thing too.
Yeah, exactly. And so
I know that after this, I'm gonna have piles. I'm making that call. Don't be worried.
So the speed only not an issue after fermentation, because earlier you said don't heat it up.
yeah,
Yeah.
so we did a bunch of tests, and we literally like nearly boiled the product after we were completely done. And it wasn't until we pretty much like had it out of boil for a couple minutes where we noticed like a significance in flavor. Where so PUs or pasteurizing units are like, you know, how you measure what happens in them. I don't remember what the temperature they start accumulating at, but you know, at what, like 115 or 20 or something like that, you start accumulating PUs. So if you flash something at boiling, it only takes 1 second for it to get the PUs that it needs, where at 120, you would need it to be in there for maybe half an hour. And so there's a lower level that you can get the PUs that you want to have a stable product and have it safe. And so we essentially just have a hot tub that we drop our bottles in.
Yeah, so it's a sealed container,
Yep.
right? Too, so there's nowhere for those volatile things
To escape.
So
you drag them off, they're gonna go back in the solution.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's, you know, that's kind of like the detailed run through on making it. Something I didn't talk about, adjuncts, which I'll talk about while we're drinking all these, I think is applicable, is so the first mead is honey and water. Wildflower is a variety of honey. It's pretty floral honey. It's pretty fruity. I think yours is a great example of it.
Thanks. I got to keep my temperatures down. I taste them side by side, and I'm like, oh yeah, your aromatics come through a lot more quickly. I got mine up to like 130,
Okay.
and that was probably a little bit too high, but I was trying to pasteurize a little bit because I was worried. I have a question about that. Do you pre-boil water at all, or you're good with your water? It's not going to have any
We just use filters. So we just use physical filters to sterile filter our water. So we filter our water down to like 0.2 micron. And that's just like a series of 4 filters that all brewing water goes through. And that way we can use cold water that is sterile filtered. So we don't.
Fine carbon filter. I think it's only like 0.5
Yeah.
microns. So
You know, the truth is like, we do that to all of the water just to try to eliminate as many variables as we can. But the truth is, it's like, who knows what in the honey, it's like there's dead bees, there's wax, there's all kinds of stuff in it. So it's like, here we are, like sterile filtering this water and making it as neutral as we can. And then we have this honey that got all kinds of stuff. We don't plate all of our honey before we use it. You know, it's like to know what could be growing out of it. It's like, it's good. There's going to be stuff in there.
Those are gonna be multicolored plates.
Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, it's gluten-free, but not vegan. Just, I mean, honey on its own. But so the other thing is we back sweeten. And back sweetening is a way that we can end at the residual sugar that we want with, I think, a higher level of accuracy than just trying to cold crash, because depending on what kind of resources you have in system, you don't have jacketed tanks or anything like that. Cold crashing can happen at different rates, and the yeast can stop working at different rates. And so if you're shooting for something very specific, getting at that specific level, I think is difficult that way. And then also when you back sweeten, you're kind of giving it this hit of this fresh honey that's going to come through really clearly.
You're back sweetening with honey.
And so,
Same variety of honey.
yep, yeah. And so we'll do essentially a mixture of honey and water to a level where then we know what the gravity is. So then when we back sweeten it, we can, you know, get it to the residual sugar that we want. And that helps with a lot of the finishing aromatics and the finishing flavor a lot. And so that's honey as an adjunct. Honey as an adjunct, that's mead. Here we also have, for those of you that are calling in, we have a cranberry and strawberry mead. For adding fruit, we get pureed, just pureed fruit, right? And you're going to get a better flavor extraction with pureed fruit than you are with whole fruit. And so, I mean, it's really simply just fresh fruit that's ground up.
And whole fruit is such a pain in the ass to work with in a commercial setting.
So if you're interested in doing any fruit meats, and I think that for us, kind of the thought process is like cranberries are a great acidic fruit, and so we can use them to make this acidity and this level of depth to our meat that they contribute to the mouthfeel and the body that is different than.
They're in a brewery.
It's not just a fruit. It's not like a sweet fruity drink. You know, I think that when people see like, oh, it's honey and cranberries, it's like, oh, this is just a sweet fruity drink. It's like, no, actually, cranberries can be used for other things that they contribute, such as their acidity and kind of tartness and that sort of stuff, depending on what fruit you're choosing to use and what you're trying to create. Yeah, exactly. I think that Sting is maybe Sting and the Nectarade. So,
Is it seasonal or is it always available?
So we just canned it for the first time last summer, and we just have it out this summer. And I think it fits well. I had it last year. It's a fancy grown up lemonade, not to dumb it down too much, but same thing. So we do fruit additions pretty close to the end of fermentation. A reason for that would be that if you add fruit in the beginning of the fermentation, as the fermentation is happening, a lot of those esters will glow off in the fermentation process, and so you're going to get a clearer taste of what you're adding if you add it later in the fermentation process. But we still do it with enough time that it's in there, so when you crash the tank, that you still can get clarity and that type of thing. The ginger mead that we make, we played with lots of different ways to add ginger. We boiled ginger and just made a ginger tea and added it. We had whole chunks of ginger. We did all kinds of stuff. We found that just juicing ginger and adding this raw, unfiltered ginger juice was the best thing. And ginger is pretty cool because it's like a natural fining agent that it clarifies so much faster. Yeah, it clarifies so much faster. And we played with some fining agents, but
do you find that it wants to do fermentation on its own? Because I know the ginger bug is aggressive.
Yeah, we haven't had any issues with re-fermentation of adding ginger or anything like that. But the couple times that we played with adding fining agents, it didn't there wasn't enough impact for it to. It's why are we doing an extra step if the results are pretty not that much greater than just crashing your product and giving it a little bit of time. And we're about to and then it goes through a sterile filter anyways. And so mostly it's just for us commercially, how do we prep it so it can go through the filter as easy as possible, right? Something to think about though is that if you're adding fruit or something like that, if those of you who have ever used fruit before, it settles, right? So the product at the top is going to be a way different color than the product at the bottom. And so, thinking about that is most of the time, if you're, by the time you rack it, you don't really have to worry it'll homogenize. But
You ever tried ginger juice on it?
we've not. Well, we did try it, but part of the reason was that, I think our ginger mead smells like someone's grating fresh ginger right in front of your nose. The other ways that we add it, we find things like the ginger would be really spicy, but you wouldn't get the fresh aroma of ginger. Or you get a little bit of aroma of ginger, but then you wouldn't really taste it. And adding the fresh juice was the only way that we got an applicable amount for the palate and the fresh aroma, where fermenting it with it, you would just you didn't really smell it, and you just then would taste it being this spicy hot thing. I think that I really like spicy things, so we have a habanero Nectarade out. In my opinion about that is, if you're going to make something spicy and say that it has habaneros in it, it should be spicy, because if I go to a place and order something that's spicy and I like spicy and it doesn't taste spicy, it's and if you don't like spicy things, you're probably not going to walk up and order a habanero Nectarade.
So where is that available? It's not packaged, right?
So it's just on track. I have to. I'll send you an email to follow up. I'll look at it. Yeah, I'll look at it.
Seriously, to get the word out about what that's like a whole product.
I honestly think that one of the best things that could happen to us is there could be like an angry beehive, like equivalent to what Angry Orchards did to the cider industry. That, you know, like if Budweiser started making a mead, they could teach the entire country what mead is in like 1 week of advertisements, and then we can be like the local producer that uses better quality honey and has a better product, but they have millions of dollars to teach the whole country what meat is rather than us just like showing ourselves on fire for Shark Tank over here.
Well, no, Shark Tank, because it's a different product. It's naturally free. It's different.
Oh, right.
I think you got the word out there. So all countries, like free advertising. You should seriously watch stuff. And I'm not even kidding you. Like, you would do so well. And it tastes amazing. Like,
thank you.
all of my friends would love this, but they don't know about it. Like, everybody would drink this.
They're gonna actually watch the YouTube.
But all of my girlfriends would drink this.
And you know, like hard seltzers, right?
Right.
Have become.
I am smart. I am White Claw dad. Like I have
So I don't know if you all are familiar with this, but like you know, so hard cider has been slowly growing for a while. There was a little bit where total cider sales in the United States went downhill because Angry Orchards was like 80% of the cider market in the country, and they started to decline, and their decline was enough that total cider production in the U.S. was going down, despite the fact that regional cider places were growing. And so, in the last year or so, the growth of the regional cider places have outpaced the decline of Angry Orchards, and so total cider production is once again increasing, but it's at a small level, you know. So, you know, the total hard cider market is something, you know, somewhere between $300 and $500 million right now, depending on if you're just looking at large format growth like IRI or Nielsen data, or if you're including draft sales and independent, which is where a lot more of the craft cider is being sold. Hard seltzer, right, didn't really exist until 2016. And this year, it's a $1 billion market. It's already double the size of cider. And it's fucking crazy.
I drink it all the time. I don't care. I don't care about the perception. I can push my kids, like, what I started drinking it when I could push the kids' stroller to the park, or you can be sitting at the ball game, like watching your kid play Little League. Oh, that guy's got a seltzer water. It's like,
People are bringing it to baseball games.
If you haven't had it, find Seek Out.
But you can bring this instead.
Seek Out. Well, yeah, I mean, drink our mead first.
No, this tastes better.
I did make a joke the
But
other day.
if you do want to try some hard seltzer, Seek Out is produced by Two Towns, and so they're actually doing like real fruit fermentation rather than cane sugar, and all of their flavor additions are real rather than it being Boston Beer Company or Budweiser or Mike's Hard Lemonade or one of those bigger brands. So if you do want to try a seltzer, I would recommend Seek Out as a craft. It's a legitimate craft option.
I was emptying our gutters yesterday. I needed like.
You need to hydrate.
Yeah, but if you're just looking for something light and easy to drink, just drink our. I mean, first drink our mead.
Great.
Because you know, like you're saying, the truth is you know these products are. There's 5 grams of sugar in 12 ounces. It's all natural sugar that's unprocessed and from honey. And so relatively low sugar, they're really light, they're really easy drinking. They lend to like any flavor profile that you want. And you know, I think that it's kind of talking about just the opportunity of what mead can be, and changing the perception of it is a big part of it. And so, you know, from here we have a mead that's only honey and water, a ginger mead, all the way to this coffee mead. Right. And coffee is just like a fancy grown-up cold brew. It's crazy. I think that you think of coffee being this like acidic, dark, like bitter thing, but it turns out like the little bit of honey lightens it up a lot, and so you get the fresh aroma of coffee, but it's still like very light and easy to drink.
Are you using raw beans or roasted?
So we use roasted beans, and we do different types of, so we essentially dry similar, we dry coffee it instead of dry hop it. But we also just make a bunch of cold brew and then add, so we work with an organic coffee roaster in Corvallis, and we got them to do a bunch of custom roasts for us, Pacifica Coffee. And so we work with Pacifica Coffee in Corvallis, and they'll also then take that, make a bunch of cold brew, and then add essentially the cold brew to our mead, and it's really amazing. Like, it's really amazing how the flavors pair together.
The aroma and the taste is completely
different. It smells like fresh coffee. It's like expect it to be like bitter. And
so yeah, you look at it, it doesn't look like
it's really great on a Saturday morning. Or Tuesday morning, depending on where you work and what you do.
This is one of our prominent members was roasting me for being a guy who drinks White Claw. And then I will show you, this is caption to this photograph is Session Mead, that's my new White Claw. So they're me chilling in the backyard. They're piling on me because I unabashedly said, I'll drink White Claw, I'm gonna brew one at home because, you know, Shelly's friends, they want to have.
Well, they're gonna want to drink this. All of my friends.
Shelly, so she's having bachelor in paradise parties.
They also make really great cocktails. Like Moscow mules with our meads are kind of a no-brainer, or just whiskey ginger. A little bit of Kahlua and bourbon and hot bar is really dangerous. We made it our tap room and we call it a Kremlin cooler. It's like our version of the White Russian.
Some Malibu in there?
Yeah, or like a little bit of mezcal in the Nectarade is really delicious, or like mezcal and jalapeno juice. If you come to our tap room, you can try all these cocktails.
Wow.
We just started doing some cocktails with it just because it's fun. It's easy, and our meats lend to it. But
so I think do you have distribution in Beaverton anywhere?
So most new seasons.
Oh.
Most new seasons carry our product.
They're in the beer fridge.
Whole Foods, Zupan's market of choice, a lot of the Fred Meyers, and then a lot of the bottle shop. I mean, there's a lot of bottle shops like both Belmont Station and John's Market carry every product that we've ever made uptown. And they'll take cases of it.
We live around the corner from us.
Altamira is one of our biggest draft accounts where we have a permanent tap handle. If you ever ate sushi at Shigezo in downtown, our ginger mead was a permanent tap handle there for a long time. Blends well with that type of thing.
You guys are really well distributed around here.
That's awesome.
I feel like
So it's around some, it's definitely still more, craft-centric places where you can find a bigger.
I feel like you should have this on tap though.
But Fred
you're fighting over.
well, maybe
We don't have 19. Yeah, we're a gluten-free alternative, and so breweries will put us on as a non-beer gluten-free alternative where we're fighting with hard seltzers, cider, and
these guys.
other
This guy.
I think some places compare us, but even still, we're different.
It's a totally different.
Our meat's been available here. I don't know if it is right now, but for a long time, it's like still, because it's like even if you want something that's diversity to a gluten-free beer, and there's still enough differentiation from the product. Very clearly, mead is not a beer.
But it's delicious.
Are there ever done like collaboration with the brewery to make like a braggot or something like that?
We definitely have. We have not done a gluten-free braggot. We've worked with Falling Sky to make some pretty awesome stuff. And so we've done that. We've done, we're talking and are about to make something with Ale Song, which is pretty awesome. And so we're about to do something with Fort George. We're going to do kind of like a honey Berliner Weiss type of thing. And so there's different ways that you can do it too, because there's all these funny words with mead, like Sizer is a mead
Sizer
made with
and
fermentable sugar from honey and fermentable sugar from apples. Climate is a fermentable sugar from meat, honey, and fermentable sugar from grapes. And so, like, we've done like a 7% Climate with a bunch of fresh, like, Pinot Gris juice or something like that, are pretty amazing. Sizers are another really awesome option, and it's kind of a way that you can make your apple juice go a lot longer. And so if you get fresh pressed apple juice, you can essentially, like, if you get 5 gallons of it, you can turn that into 15 gallons of Sizer with a little bit of honey pretty easily. Then Methyl Blend is a mead that's made with spices. Mellow Mel is a mead made with fruit. Braggot is a mead or honey, fermentable sugar from honey, fermentable sugar from grain. Most beer competitions put that in the mead category, but a braggot, it pretty much tastes like drinking a beer with honey in it.
This is our frustration.
It doesn't taste like a mead at all. And so, you know,
Is there a breakdown percentage for that? Like, it's mostly.
Yeah, I know legally speaking, if it's 50% or more fermentables coming from grain, it falls into the beer category.
The honey beers, specialty ale, which we have to fight with, is gluten-free. One of our biggest complaints is that there is no gluten-free category.
So,
So we're up against barley beers
Yeah.
in any category.
Yeah.
And we're advancing beers to the national
Yeah.
finals and getting beaten out by a, you know, what was it, a rye barley wine, a wheat,
Different category.
what was it? It was a wheat Eisbach and a,
I don't remember.
it was a,
Does anybody online have any questions?
yeah, that's a great, I'll unmute them.
Sorry, I've been just rambling.
No, that's good. We invited you here to do
I
that.
gotta remember to slow down.
No,
I'm muted.
You've been feeding us pretty
I'm
well.
gonna be your biggest fan.
It's not letting me override Kale's mute.
I'm gonna bring this to all of
This is it. Do you hear me okay?
Yeah, okay, Ed is one of our founding members. This dude asks good questions. Hit it, Ed.
Yeah, well, I suspect maybe Kel has his own locally muted as well. So I was going to ask you, what do you guys use to drive the pH down? I have to admit, I came about 15 minutes late, so I might have missed that. But is there some acid of choice that's your preferred one for managing pH?
He's asking, do you make an addition to drive pH down? You said you have a
we
problem
no,
with
it's
pH
so
already being
the
too low.
during fermentation, pH drops a lot on its own, so it's more about getting it up. We have found for anything that is going to be about below 10% alcohol, you don't really need to do adjustments. That it'll be okay as long as you're adding nutrients and keeping the yeast happy that way. If you're wanting to make a mead above 10%, I would recommend step additions of sugar. So do some level of depletion and then add sugar back in. And so that way, but the pH on the end and the final product, we don't really do anything to change. And I think that's kind of like the beauty of it. If you drink just a mead like our wildflower mead, it's really neutral. It's like you can drink it all day long and never get tired of it because it's not too acidic and it's.
Do you have an idea of what that post-fermentation pH is? Like a 5-ish, 4?
Yeah, it's a little over 4.
Yeah, so typically they say that 4.5 and less is stable, and the yeast will tend to seek about 4.5, a little bit less, like 4.3, right? But I would imagine for some of the fruitier mead, you would seek a tartness.
My head, which I'm sorry, our cellar crew, which takes those methods every day of the week, could tell you exactly. But yeah, it's kind of right on that 4 range. Finishing for us. Yeah. So. I mean, the thing that we do to add acidity would be adjuncts, would be like adding cranberries or adding lemon juice or things like that have their own natural acidity. We're not adding any specific compound, just specifically for acid adjustment.
Just curious, what is the OLCC categorized as?
Like other than standard agricultural wine. We're a winery. We have a winery license, and so we can't touch grain. So if we do like
You can't make
if we make
beer,
a braggot or collaborative, so we pretty much can just bring honey somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so, we've talked about some braggots are made by doing just completely separate fermentations and then blending finished products, and I think that's a really cool way to do it. But even then, under our license, we can't do blending like that. And so, but we do have a tap room with a full on-premise license, and there we can buy a finished beer and we can buy a finished mead and do whatever we want with it. but then it's only available at our tap room. Right. Are there any other questions from? Did that answer your question about acidity, Ed?
Ed's on mute. No, it's muted.
Yeah, there we go. I think I put the space bar here. So in large part, it did. I would think that for some of the fruitier meads, you'd seek a tartness, and I've heard some suggestions you want to shoot for a much lower pH, but I guess you don't find that to be the case.
I don't get a lot of tartness of these meads at this ABV. I'm not getting a lot of tartness. Well, I mean, that's the wine.
Yeah,
wine juice.
Unless you're adding something else that's going to contribute that just a mead that's just a traditional mead, just honey and water, there's not really going to be that, like, really any tartness.
Yeah, certainly not like a
So then are there any other chemistry considerations? I know that, for example, with beer, you're worried about calcium for yeast health and, sulfate and chloride balance. I mean, are there any of those kind of factors that come into play with mead at all?
Do you mean pre-treating water type of question there, Ed?
I mean, what's the water chemistry that you would seek to have ideally?
Neutral with nothing going on in it,
It's water.
perfect. Like we want a perfect pH, and then we sterile filter all of it to 0.2 micro. We don't want really the water to contribute anything. We want the honey to be all of the determining factor.
Ed, I would go and pull Philomath's water profile, and you'll find your answer there since they don't alter it. You can just get their water profile where it's balanced. There's low levels pretty much across the board, like 10 to 20 parts per million, everything right across the board.
We needed JP here for this specific question.
I would imagine you knock the chlorine out of it at least.
Brewing into Philomath for.
Well, no, it's 3 points.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But even I'm sure if you have water where you can noticeably taste things like chlorine or whatever things your well or city is doing to treat it, definitely working to get rid of that. But if you have relatively clean water, and you're doing a good fermentation and your honey is good, it's not something you have to, that from our experience has been something you have to stress about, too much. But, like,
So the only other ingredient
city water while having algal bloom in it, and even though it's like clean and safe to drink, it just tasted super musty and gross. And I'm really glad that we have never had to use paralysis city water to have to deal with that issue.
All right. So the ultimate question: your hangover, mead hangover.
Oh, good question. That's important.
I can only speak for myself. We all have our own bodies, right? Some people can't eat gluten, and some people have an easier time with it. For example, I'm kind of cursed by our meats. Like any time I drink, if I drink like one beer, I'll notice it the next day. Where I could drink Waggle for 48 hours straight on a camping trip and not notice it. Like wake up feeling completely awesome. We make a hopped mead, so we just simply dry hop with, and that is the only mead that I really get that I'll notice a hangover with. But like our ginger mead and our wildflower mead, I've been on a lot of overnight rafting trips, and you just happen to forget to drink many other things for approximately.
It's 80% water.
Yeah, it's a mead cleanse. It's kind of it's a religious thing. And these good honey, it's a tribute to the flowers and Mother Nature. And really seriously, I find, and also just all intoxications are a little bit different too. Like if you drink a bunch of wine, you feel different than if you drink a bunch of IPA and you feel different than if you drank a bunch of tequila. With our mead, I find that it's like very clear-headed and very energetic, and like it's kind of like the sativa of alcohol products.
It's a heady drunk.
It's like, you know, like drinking, go for a run or a bike ride or in your house rather than like drink it and stay on your couch type of experience, which is maybe more like if you drink a bunch of barley wine, what happens to me. But so you know, I think that there's a couple things that contribute to that. It's like, one, I think that the alcohol is just a small detail, that it's more like the properties of just like, I think that I'm allergic to hops, and I think hops give me a hangover, right? And so the oil and hop is really what gives me a headache and makes me feel like crap. And so like really hoppy beer I have a difficult time with, but beer that isn't really hopped, I have a better time with, and whether it's gluten-free or not.
Yeah, I hear that a lot.
I can't.
One of the brewers here has a legit hop allergy.
I can't really.
Yeah, like Slayer's got a hop allergy. You do too. Your wife does.
Yeah. So.
But when they're fresh.
When they're in her face and you're hearing this thing.
It's so allergenic. Like, if you ever go out for like hop harvest, like they'll just have piles of hops.
I love it.
It
smells
great.
great.
You just like jump into the pile like Scrooge McDuck style,
And then you're
just covered in hives.
Oh,
Like a
no.
week.
So.
When I would harvest my own, the pricklies, like they're so it's histamines like crazy. Yeah, the vines have serious histamine.
It's not just spikes. Those spikes have.
Oh yeah, when they talk, like,
I would say the other contributing factor is just residual sugar.
Yeah.
Where
If you're sugar bombing all night.
depending on like what your finishing gravity is going to be a bigger determining factor on how you feel the next day than most other things. And you know, if you make IPA that isn't balanced, it tastes metallic. Like hops that are bitter without sweetness taste metallic. Like, it tastes like you're biting into aluminum can. And so we did play with that. So we were like making different ways of adding hops to our mead, and you know, some of them produce this like really without. So we found just simply dry hopping it. To, like,
What do you dry hop with?
We've played around. We've done lots of different stuff, but like Cascade and Citra, and
Yeah.
you know, kind of just classic.
I like that Citrus being into the classic category when it was the new kid. Like that was the new school hop.
Yeah, I mean now, yeah, you know, as you guys know, can make your literally taste like you added citrus to it. Yeah, pretty fun to be able to do.
Oh, I remember the first beer I made. It was Amarillo Citra, and people were like, "Oh, grapefruit beer." And it's like,
yeah,
no, that's just Amarillo and Citra. They're like, "This is a grapefruit IPA, right?" It's like, no, it's not. Like they were new and.
When did you buy this one?
When? So we opened up Nectar Creek and sold our very first batch, which the very first batch ever was ginger mead, in September of 2012. But that was probably after over 5 years of making Session Mead. Like we probably spent 5 years and made thousands of gallons, 5 gallons at a time, Session Meads, and always have it. Yeah. You know, you as you guys know, homebrewing, it's like you always have them on tap whenever someone comes to your house. You're like, taste this, and you're like looking at it like, whoa, I thought I was just getting a beer, and you're like, no, what do you think though?
I need you to write notes. Here's the BJCP category.
Can you fill out this? Yeah. Can you fill out this card while you drink?
This is a judge's sheet right here. So this is our parents. We've got 5 here.
Or you know, going to friends' weddings and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, it was just a lot of playing with it, and a lot of, you know, kind of accumulation. And a big part of that is we couldn't go and like work in another meadery of scale to learn how to do it. Where if you want to get into brewing, you could go work at a brewery, or you could go get a master's degree in fermentation, or you could get a, you know, winemaking, get a master's degree in enology, but it doesn't exist for me, and there's not any textbook or anyone else. It's like working with honey on a scale, and so if you don't spend time thinking about it, you know, it's harder to jump into when there's not like books and equipment and a lot of people set up, you know, where we'll have people starting meaderies and like, hey, what size oil kettle should I get? And it's like, well, I would start by not getting that. And they're like, okay, well, this is what we're going to do anyways. And it's like, all right, if you guys have that process figured out for yourselves, then like, you know, we're really happy to help out and talk with people, whether it's people have questions on a homebrew scale or people that are starting other places, because, you know, our take is the more people out there doing it, the more unified voice there can be and more quality product, the better for everybody. But, you know, so we're pretty dang open, and happy to share lots of secrets about our place. But I think that's another difficult thing with the commercial category, is that I think there's a lot of people that haven't had a mead that's clean and quality like ours, and so people will make a product that has well-known off flavors that if you understand fermentation, you can pick out what they are, whether it's a yeast nutrient issue or a fermentation temperature issue, or you can taste that the honey's boiled or things like that, and they just think, oh, this is just what mead tastes like. It's like, no, that's an issue that shouldn't be in any alcoholic product. And so the standard for that, I think, is set up that we've seen a handful of commercial companies open up and produce products. It's like, oh, this is great. It's like, well, you know, there's just like basic fermentation issues that you don't want, whether you're making beer or wine or anything like that, that are really clear in the product. And I think that, you know, that speaks to just what the knowledge is, even for people opening up meaderies, that they haven't had, you know, when we were opening up, we tried to find someone that was making a carbonated mead anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world, you know, let alone it wasn't something that was readily available. There's Redstone has been making carbonated meads in Colorado for a really long time, and they have some examples of mead that I think are great. But in Oregon, you could find like one or two of them, and they didn't pasteurize their product, and so consistency was really difficult with tasting their mead and making, you know, evaluation and comparing ours to it. And then there's a place in Eugene that opened up for about a year called Blue Dog.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you remember those guys. There were some of their meads I really liked, but they also had a lot of obvious hop flavors. Like some of their meads were very sulfury.
Jason, tell us your scorched meat story. No.
Well, have you ever heard of I think it's called a Borscht style of mead that is supposed to be with burnt honey?
Yeah.
Borscht. Yeah.
Let's hear it.
Both ways. Yeah,
Did you guys do introductions yet? So,
no, I'm
Jason's former head brewer of
Ghost
Fish.
Fish.
Okay.
So I've been brewing gluten-free for a long time, but I dabbled in a lot of mead making when I was just getting started with brewing, because I felt like at the time honey was like the only sort of variety you could get for fermentables that were gluten-free on the shelf. But I really was like on the trail of like a stout or something stout-like. So when I read about the Bochet stout, I'm like, oh, I bet that would be great. What I didn't realize is that caramelizing like raw, unfiltered honey is a terrible idea, because there's so many just like suspended solids in there. They all burn. And and I had the bright idea to hop it too, and that was totally stupid. So it ended up just being like undrinkably bitter and burnt, and just like licking the bottom of a deep fryer. And I aged it for like 6 years, and that's how long it took to become drinkable. And it was only barely drinkable, but like I've never tasted a good example of that style, so I wanted to kind of.
So we made one by accident. Like lots of great products come, we have honey melters that if honey is crystallized that you can use, and they look like a giant potato masher that fit in a drum, and the bottom is coils that are connected to a computer that you can set the temperature exactly what you want. The computer shorted out and fried 55 gallons of honey. And, you know, that turns out to be like a significant amount of money for a small brewery. We're like, okay, well, we got to fucking do something with it. And so it wasn't like completely fried, but like it was enough that the honey tasted kind of smoky and kind of burnt. So we ended up making a Brett mead with it. We called it triple Brett because I don't remember what but we did 3 strains of Brett in old bourbon barrels, and we released it at the Holiday Ale Festival. You know, it happens in Pioneer Square, and it tasted fucking amazing. and it's one of those things that I'm sure we could never recreate it if we tried, but it was one of those happy mistakes that it worked, like the flavor worked out really well and it balanced. And so when we've tried to, like, you know, people will come and be like, what's your darkest one? It's like, well, we got one that's red. You know, it's like, there's a lot of funny consumers. It's like, what's your dark one? I like dark beer. It's like, well, none of these are beer. Like, none of them are gonna taste like that. And they're like, well, what's your darkest one? It's like, this one's red. And it's like, they're drinking like a bright fruity thing. Like, yeah, I like this one. It's like, all right, whatever. You know, we thought a lot about how to make a product like that too. And like, you know, I've been Fort George distributes our product in that small area that is distribution, and we have our product at their tap room available. And so we talked festival of dark arts for you. Yeah, so we talked to them like, guys, you need like one gluten-free mead option there. Like, what do we have to do? It's like, we'll make like a bourbon barrel-aged coffee mead, which is like the closest thing that we can get to some kind of stout-like, you know, characteristics of it. But they're like, it has to be a stout. It's like, okay, well, by definition, would never ever make a stout unless we do like a braggot with stuff like you know, a honey braggot or honey stout braggot type of thing. So, you know, I've been talking with them like, come on, like, what do we? And you know, so for us, our version of like dark products are like using bourbon barrels or using like coffee or using adjuncts that'll be, I don't know, yeah, you know, it's types of things like that. But at the end of the day, it's like, you're never going to make a stout. You know, it's not, honey is not the right liquid to end up like that. And you know, if you look at some of these, you know, these meads, they're so light. You know, they're so clear. And you look at the difference of color. Yeah, even the coffee mead is like barely an amber color. You know, not even. It's still more of like straw, and that's like with tons of cold brew added to it, and it's still like a straw color. And you know, we're adding like tons of like, you know, we use 1,000-gallon tanks. It's like we're adding like, it's like 40 gallons of cold brew or something like that, and it's still like, that's a lot of cold brew. That's so much coffee.
I'll tell you one thing. I'm in the honey business. Yeah, Oregon growers, we sell raw, unfiltered, pasteurized honey throughout the Northwest on the shelves. And for a while, it was me bottling it. And we didn't have a hot room. And we were using belts for a while. In the early days, we used belts to heat up a barrel. And I had a belt, and so I heated it overnight, and then the next day, I bottled it. This was on a small scale. And one day, the belt I got short circuited. And I don't know what happened, and I don't know what the boiling point of honey is, but it reached it. Wow. With the belt. The next day, it was like going over the side. Burning when it reached the belt. And I was like, you know, I was like, oh shit, you know. And it was blackberry honey. High value honey.
It's kind of crazy that it did that as opposed to just like reducing the nothing and burning.
Well, I mean, there's a full barrel. Yeah, the belt was unfilled. You know, it had a ways to go to get reduced. Yeah. So, I mean, it went, and I got there in the morning, and I was like, oh, you know. And so I turned it off. The worst mess I've ever had to clean up in my life is burnt honey and colors everywhere.
Nothing exploded.
Yeah, so we
like an ETF type of situation.
Luckily, because my brother had worked at all these bee farms, when we were looking at like how to best treat our honey and get it to a point where we could work with it, we knew pretty well off the start, like never use like belts or not. Despite the fact that they're regularly sold, and they're still, like if you look at like a beekeeping supply thing, they're still there and available, but they're still like, especially because they get really hot, and so like they'll produce a ring that's burnt or like to melt the whole thing.
I use the wrap for my fermentation. Like it's for reptile cages. Like it's a thermal wrap. But I do worry about those. If there's a blow off, you know, in fermentation with gluten-free beers, we don't really have a lot of blow offs because there's not a lot of.
Just to finish that off,
Not a lot. I mean,
when
not a
it
lot
actually settled and I got all the foam and all this stuff, I was right pink. Like,
I leave a lot of headspace.
And it was blackberry honey. It was a very light color to begin with. It came off bright reddish pink, and it actually tasted really spectacular. And so, like, we were like, all right, this is a whole barrel of pretty expensive honey. What do we do with this? We just write it off. I might actually call you guys. I called one honey company, and they were like, no. But actually, a brewery bought it from us and just did some experiments, and was like, this is really good, and ended up using it. It was one of those things that could never be recreated again. Because nobody's gonna. You're not gonna find a short enough belt. Yeah.
Well, it can't
I don't know what the point is, but it actually. The snuff actually tasted really good. I still have a sample of it. It's still bright. I don't know what happened in that process, but
I had something a little bit similar happen. I was doing barley wine, home just a little 6-count batch. Short honey yeah. And so I was going to just simmer them. I said my goal was to get it to like this deep dark red. I wanted all the ingredients going in. It's probably like red, trying to get an actual red color barley wine. It's on my stove, simmering the honey, it's so great. I turned my back for about 60 seconds. I turned back around.
bubbles
And,
everywhere,
and it's on fire.
Yeah.
It's actually hot.
Have you ever made caramel or like anything like that?
I have
It's like making candy at any time. Yeah. The temperature and the details are like it's so hard.
Yeah. So I've done it since then, and I didn't turn my back. But that I had to disassemble my stove. To just make it clean. My wife was so I got my stove parts. I'm like, hi, go upstairs. Fine. Smoke bomb. And we're done. That's what we are.
Well,
honey messes.
No,
you know,
God,
I got these really great infographics that I'll pass around. For those of you that are online, you can download these on our website. So it's it's an overview of everything we just talked about from we'll zoomed out a little bit. And if anyone has questions, and any of you are going to go out and kind of work on making some of your own meads, don't be shy to email me or give a call or something like that. Happy to be a resource and help out. If anybody's got like a stuck fermentation or is just got some questions before they want to get going, please any email that goes to info@nectarcreek.com I get. So really simply you can just email that and I'll be able to help out and answer some questions. And I'm still here and happy to help. And if you're ever in part of the Willamette Valley, you got to come to our facility. We always have a handful of meats on tap there that are only available there.
Well, we're stopping.
We'll do some cool barrel aged things down there and some different fun stuff that a lot of times won't go anywhere else.
Open on weekend.
Every day of the week at 11 a.m. Yeah. So 11 until 9 or 10 o'clock at night every day of the week. And then we do some big special events. And so National Mead Day is the first Saturday in August, always established, which we commercially are piggybacking off of home brewing because the National Home Brewing Mead Day is typically the first Saturday in August. And so we're kind of just working with that. And so we're doing a big event on August 3rd, and we've got like a huge lineup of, I think we're going to have right now, we already have it planned out to have like over 15 of our own mead varieties on tap.
Kid friendly at your place?
Yeah.
Awesome.
All ages.
We should maybe
Dogs on our patio. Yeah, bring the whole family. You're allowed to have service miniature horses.
And kids.
Yeah.
I mean, what?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, this is a side tangent. ADA rules about service animals has a special section about service miniature horses. You can look it up, and I just want to know like what the lawsuit was that made that the case, and I can't wait for the airlines. Oh my! Someone got a miniature horse on here.
It is so funny because my boy is mentally retarded, and I wanted to get an open authorization for some service animal chicken because my girl has some backyard chickens and wanted to allow that in our HOA and stuff like that. And his pediatrician is actually a good friend of mine. Says, "Oh, no problem. Matter of fact, he doesn't want a pony, does he? I'll authorize a pony."
I'll get you a pony. What are you looking for?
Yeah. So service miniature horses.
Sorry, service parent.
Yeah. But yeah, so if any of you can come down on August 3rd,
for real.
it'll be a fun event. But really, anytime we've got some fun stuff going on. So I really thank you all for inviting me to come.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
I'm obvious huge fan, and I'm glad you made it.
Yeah, I've never had a session meeting, to be honest with you. All my meetings have been 15 bucks. Yeah.
Hey,
I thought that was me,
Hey, thanks from Seattle. Do you distribute up into the Seattle area or not?
A little bit. I can look up a specific list for you, but a handful of the total wines carry it. Capital Cider pretty regularly carries it. Man, where else? Some of the Whole Foods, like a Whole Foods in Bellevue, pretty much always had it. We work with Columbia distributing up there, and so
They can probably get you.
if you can, dock sales at their warehouse is always a good option. But if you want, I can get you a list, or you can reach out to someone in Columbia, or just tell your local bar that they should order some from them.
There you go. Grow some business.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. This is fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you all
so much. All right, I'll go ahead and shut off the Zoom here. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for
Have a
making
good weekend. Take care. Thank you.